And we are back again for another week of this. Hey, everybody, welcome to GuidePoint Security's GPS Live, our weekly wrap-up of interesting cybersecurity news that we've found, just discussion about what's going on out there in the world. I am Tristan Morris.
And I'm Jonathan Singer.
And we have with us today a special guest who is joining us from the GuidePoint Research and Intelligence team, GRIT, because they just released their second quarterly report of the year of ransomware wrap-ups and all of the research that they have been doing, everything they've been tracking. And as a deeply integrated part of our incident response team, they are on the leading edge of what is happening. So we're going to be talking about the GRIT report today. And Justin, want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. Everybody, very excited to be here. Justin Timothy, as Tristan said, part of GRIT's, the GuidePoint Research and Intelligence team. Been doing threat intelligence for GuidePoint for the last year, and excited to kind of nerd out about ransomware for the next little bit.
Yeah, and nerd out, we will. We are so excited to have you. We love having you guys from GRIT on to talk about stuff because we get to do an all ransomware show, which is not actually that different than our normal show because ransomware happens a lot. But before we dive into anything, what we do need to say is that the views and opinions expressed by the hosts of this live stream are our own and do not necessarily reflect the official opinions of GuidePoint Security. That holds especially true on this episode for Jonathan and I. But Justin is probably saying things that GuidePoint can safely say are safe, considering we published an entire report about it. But we are just in the end a couple of guys who are talking about cybersecurity and our opinions on things. And sometimes we have strong opinions that might not necessarily be what everyone thinks. But before we go into the report, Justin actually brought us some really cool info right before the show started. So Justin, do you want to cover this brand new breaking news?
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like the ransomware group Hunters International actually released a new version of their encryption and decryption software. This announcement actually came on their ransomware data leak site, and they announced their 5.0 version of the software. They said they fixed all the issues from the previous versions, and their decryption process is now smooth, fast, and reliable. We can probably take that with a bit of a grain of salt, but this kind of shows that the threat groups are really needing to kind of keep up with the other ones and trying to put themselves ahead of their competition. It's really just a branding thing as well, just to kind of make sure they're in the forefront. They know they're formidable against their adversaries, and really probably doesn't necessarily mean a ton for their actual what's going on under the hood of the encryption, but it is pretty important to note that they're touting this.
Yeah, and Hunters International, I believe, is a group that has been highlighted in previous GRIT reports as part of the threat actor spotlight. So GRIT has a ransomware taxonomy. You guys have this taxonomy you use to talk about ransomware groups, ranging from established groups like Lockbit and others that have been doing this for a long time and are very prevalent, all the way down to ephemeral, groups that are just kind of popping up. There's, some incident happens somewhere that someone says, oh, I can take advantage of that. And they pop up, they hit a couple places with ransomware, and then they kind of fade away. So with Hunters International, how do you guys classify them right now?
So Hunters is definitely an established group. They've been operating for long enough to us to consider that. They've also claimed the victim count. There's also a lot of evidence suggesting that they're a rebrand of Hive. Early on, there was some analysis done that said they shared a lot of code with Hive after Hive was taken down by law enforcement. Of course, Hunters came out and said, this is all false. We just bought the code. We're not Hive at all. But we can really take their word with a grain of salt there.
The ransomware of Theseus problem. Yes. But awesome. Well, that's great. So I think the cool thing about that is, the screenshot that we had up there for a second was directly from their site. And it was just posted about a day ago. And in doing some quick Googling, the only things I can find talking about it are a couple of Twitter accounts that have brought it up. But so it's really cool that for once, Jonathan, we have breaking news on our show instead of stuff from Monday and Tuesday of the week. But awesome. So let's jump into the ransomware report itself. So Justin, what were the highlights of the ransomware report this time?
Yeah, at a pretty high level, we saw numbers that were kind of comparable to Q1 of 2024. There were about 100 more victims that were claimed. From last year, Q2 2023, we saw a much higher amount. We can probably account a lot of that to Clop and their pretty big movement campaign. So ransomware is kind of steady. It's not necessarily increasing or decreasing at a pretty high or low rate.
Okay.
One of the things we did note was Ransom Hub. They're a relative newcomer, just being discovered earlier this year, but they actually rose to the #1 spot for June of 2024. They've been kind of rising the ranks slowly throughout the year, and they finally took that top spot in terms of victims that were claimed on their data leak site. Personally, my assessment is they're trying to fill that void that Lockbit and Alpha V left behind and just trying to be the dominant factor in the ransomware landscape. Speaking of Lockbit, they just will not go away and die. Earlier back in May, the US and a couple other countries put some pretty serious sanctions. They identified one of the threat actors that were actually associated with it, one of the true identities. But since then, Lockbit is still posting victims. Shortly after that, they dumped a massive batch of 70 plus victims, of what we're assuming ones that were just kind of already encrypted. They were going through that negotiations process. But once the sanctions came, they realized they probably weren't going to get paid, so they just went and dumped all of them to their data leak site.
Gotcha.
Along with that, Lockbit's also kind of making some weird false claims. They claimed the Federal Reserve earlier this year.
Yeah. I remember when I saw that, I was not only skeptical, but also I was kind of dumbfounded, because it seems like picking a fight with the Federal Reserve and looking the U.S. government dead in the eye and being like, we're going to mess with your economy is like not what you want to do when you're already on the fringes.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, they could have just said Dow Jones too and had the exact same non-effect. I mean, it's obviously they're trying to go for it, just make some dissension or some worry among people, but I don't think it necessarily had the effect they were hoping. Shortly after, they posted some of the data that they stole, and it turns out it was just some bank that the federal government put some kind of warnings against and saying, hey, you're doing bad things, and Lockbit allegedly compromised this bank.
So definitely not the actual Federal Reserve. Okay, good. Just a bank, some random bank.
Yeah. If I recall, that's part of one of the tactics is that if a particular company is compromised and they find another company's name in the document somewhere, they just kind of jump out and say, look, we hacked all of these other businesses too, when in reality it came from one particular sole place. Just because it has somebody else's name on it doesn't necessarily mean they were part of a compromise within their own organization also.
Mm-hmm. Right. We've even seen them hit like restaurant chains, just a franchise, and Lockbit foolishly thought they hit the entire operation. So they were asking for crazy ransom demands for a small franchisee that definitely could not pay them. And it took a little bit of effort on our end for some of the engagements to say, hey, you're actually wrong. You don't know what you've hit. And it's always a little awkward to explain that to the threat actor.
You've hit a McDonald's off the highway in Kentucky.
It's not the break you thought it was.
And just want to reiterate too that any names or brands that we do talk about here on the show doesn't necessarily mean we're speaking of anybody in a negative or positive light. It's just oftentimes mentioned as part of our stories to make sure that we're giving the most accurate information or to highlight a particular scenario.
Yeah, exactly. We are not trying to lecture anybody on this show. That's for sure. Except for the couple times that we definitely have lectured people, but usually that was well deserved and not actually a full company. So other stuff that's really interesting in the report is that you guys have a very long write-up about Ransom Hub, like you already mentioned. And you talk a lot about Lockbit and the way that they are kind of trying to hang on, even though they're kind of against the ropes right now. There's a great section just covering international encryption. I think this might be one of the longest write-ups that we've had in a GRIT report. It is very in-depth and detailed, talking about the international efforts of these ransomware groups, which is unique for the GRIT report, I think, also because usually we're very focused on US based operations, right?
Yeah, I mean, Lockbit for the longest time, the last couple of years, has primarily just hit US entities. It made up the lion's share of their victim count. But since their sanctions, we've kind of seen that shifted more towards some, I guess, countries with more developing infrastructure, like India, Mexico, and Brazil. they're seeing an increase in impacted ransomware victims.
Mhm.
And we're also seeing, along with that, less US victims. Granted, we're still seeing over 50% of the victims being US victims, but it seems like the sanctions against Lockbit has had a pretty dramatic effect, which is very nice to see.
That's good. Now there's a breakout that's in every GRIT report that I'm trying to find right now, where you guys just break down, threat actor trends, and you'll cover kind of the top 3 operational groups for whatever period the report is covering. And you mentioned Lockbit earlier in their giant dump of victims, and I find it kind of amusing in this particular report, the Q2 report for 2024, that the write-up for Lockbit is all about how their operational tempo is slowed, and they're not doing as much. But then the graph for the quarter, because of that massive dump that they had, shows them skyrocketing, and they have that first place. But you then call out the group Play, and specifically, you guys have the fact that they're usually pretty quiet in comparison to their peers. But that they don't have a publicly advertised affiliate program, and you talk about how like you kind of believe, you assess that the operational tempo is going to stay the same and consistent for Play, and then later in the report we have a really long write up and in-depth kind of exploration of Play as a group. So is there anything in particular with Play what's standing out for Play right now that has you guys thinking they're going to be kind of a consistent contender?
I mean, you kind of mentioned it a little bit. They don't operate as ransomware as a service, which means they're not taking just any threat actor to work under their umbrella. They're probably working with just a core group of trusted, experienced affiliates, or probably not affiliates is the best word, hackers or something like that, where they're experienced, they know what they're doing, they're efficient, and they're getting a high number of victims and probably a high number of ransom payments as well, which makes them kind of scary. Usually if there's an affiliate, if they were to get discovered by law enforcement, that could be a kind of a chink in the armor that could lead law enforcement to discover who's behind the operations, things like that. But since Play is just kind of keeping it closed, keeping it tight knit, it might be a little bit harder to discover who's actually behind there. They're pretty historically within the top 3 to 5 most active ransomware groups. So with this core group, they're doing quite a bit of damage.
Gotcha. Well, I don't want to spend the entire 30 minutes on the ransomware report, because the GRIT team, you guys are actually GRIT team. That's like saying ATM machine. GRIT is going to be doing a webinar, I believe, on the 30th, going in depth and breaking down what you guys have discovered and found for the ransomware report. Producer Ben is going to be dropping that link in the comments. So if you are watching and you're interested in registering for that webinar and getting a much more in-depth view of what the ransomware report covers, you can go register for that at the GuidePoint Security website. It is on our resources page. You'll be able to find it there for the upcoming events. Ben will drop the link, and everyone can get a much more in-depth view. But leaving off on Play there, let's roll into some ransomware news that has happened since July 1st, right? Because you guys gathered all the data for this going all the way up to the end of June. So some stuff has happened since the beginning of July. So let's roll into some of our news stories, if you're good with that, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. So running right into number 1, Play ransomware. So your assessment that they would be a consistent contender is probably going to hold true, because they have released a new version, a new Linux version that's targeting VMware ESXi. So what's kind of high level on this one?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely looking to enhance their capabilities and seeing how much damage they can cause. If they can encrypt all the Windows machines and all of the VMware machines on a victim's network infrastructure, then they can probably try and get a bigger ransom demand and make more money off any attacks. So, I mean, they're just trying to build out their tool set that they currently have.
Yeah. So diving a little bit deeper into this, as you mentioned, right, this is coming to us from Bleeping Computer, stating that Play is kind of taking their foray into ESXi with this particular, bit of encrypting tools. More specifically, from a technical perspective, it seems like what they're doing is, once they get their grasp on the ESXi environment, they're essentially stopping all the VMs and then encrypting the files that run the VM, like the VMDKs and stuff like that, therefore causing those VMs to no longer be accessed or booted up in that case. And then they also seem to be doing some kind of dropping some hidden messages regarding some of their onion links for Tor, some other contact information as part of their ransomware play to pay off. But I see what you're saying regarding if you can take out from the hypervisor perspective, all of the individual VMs, you're not necessarily focusing on one server, you're getting the whole cluster as a go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're definitely trying to cast a wide net, so it seems.
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing, you know, once you start targeting the like virtual machines for an organization, right? You can actually, at that point, you're going after some pretty core stuff for a lot of places. Especially if you know, companies and organizations, it seems like we're never going to escape being able to talk about the impacts of everyone going remote in 2020, right? But if organizations transitioned to like thin clients for all of their employees and just started hosting everything in office or on-prem as just virtual machines that people would remote into. Like that's going to have massive impacts if something like that were to hit an organization. So with this kind of move towards specifically trying to target that, I don't want to put you on the spot, Justin, but is there anything in particular that you would say, you know, organizations should be on the lookout for or taking into account with their plans as they're trying to plan for and prepare for incidents like that?
I mean, normally the two things are humans are normally the weak point in patch and vulnerability management. So many times we see just a phishing email or an SEO is the initial access vector where someone will download some malicious software, an info stealer, and that serves as the foothold, and the threat actor can kind of just go from there and make actions on an objective no matter what your environment is. So really just trying to make sure that the people are trained, educated, and know what signs to look for. Along with that, making sure any 0 days or any like routers and things like that, it seems like every week there's a new 0 day that drops, just making sure people are patching those. Once a POC gets released, it's kind of fair game for any threat actor trying to exploit those and really just, again, gain that foothold and do really as much damage as possible.
Yeah.
So one thing I noticed also called out in the article is that Play is only about 2 years old. In fact, they say that it only surfaced on June of 2022. You know, you mentioned earlier about how they're kind of doing this low and slow. They're very quiet. They're very secretive. They have their elite network that they're only working with to kind of keep it very tight knit. Is this a trend that we might start seeing in some other groups? Because we're also very familiar with, you know, Lockbit, loud and proud, you know, and everybody's on board. Or, you know, Ransom Hub, the affiliate program is friendly and available to everybody. So is this particular tactic we're finding to be more useful for this group? And is this going to create some more quiet, high hit targets?
I mean, it definitely has its pro and cons for Play. I mean, a con is they probably won't get as many people working under their umbrella, therefore less ransom payments and less ransom money for whoever's operating this. But in the same vein, there's less of a chance that there'd be a sloppy affiliate or somebody making mistakes, maybe going back on some of the promises and making a bad name for Play. Even though the ransomware threat actors, they kind of do operate like a business, trying to keep that name, keep any promises they make. But yeah, a lot of it is probably just trying to keep those real experienced people and so-called professionals to just operate under. So yeah, I can definitely think it could be a trend we see, but it's a lot more difficult for up and coming ransomware groups to kind of establish that base of experienced hackers who know what they're doing and know how to conduct a ransomware operation.
Got it.
Well, we have some more stories to get to, and again, if you want more information on Play as a ransomware group, that's available in the Q2 ransomware report. Which again, there should be a link to not only the webinar but also the report download itself in the comments if you'd like to see that. But speaking of, you know, how attackers and someone like Play would be accessing an organization, you know, whether that's through phishing emails or malicious software or anything like that. A key critical component of any security stack is going to be some form of EDR, hopefully something that is actually recording activity on the machine itself, which leads us to our next story. Fin7, a hacker group linked to Darkside and Black Matter, the two ransomware gangs, is selling their new EDR killer to different threat actors. So Justin, what's your initial take here?
I mean, it's definitely scary to say the least. Just from some of the screenshots and one of the articles we saw, it looks like they're selling it on Exploit, which is a pretty big cybercrime forum. So they're pretty much opening this offer to anybody who's willing to purchase it, which could mean a lot of folks could do a lot of bad, which is obviously not a good thing. But EDR is one main things we always recommend to have as a stopgap to prevent ransomware or identify any potential malicious action. And if they're killing that, it definitely is alarming to say the least.
Got it. Now, this particular tool coming to us from the article is called AV Neutralizer, also known as AU Kill. Seems to have been around also again for another couple of years, but this latest version is extremely modular. What we're seeing here is they're essentially offering a variety of different antivirus or EDR, targeted capabilities. And again, this is to kill the process, right? We've seen a number of different things between hiding, between living off the land, so logins and things like that, to utilize what's already within the system and Windows native to keep it quiet. But this particular tooling, which is now actively being used by a number of different ransomware operators, outright just terminates the EDR processes, which hopefully should set off a red flag if you're actively monitoring any systems, whether your SIM is going to alert on it, whether the console is going to alert on it for the particular tool. And so definitely from a defensive perspective, you want to be on the lookout for sudden loss of connection or termination, or those heartbeats or call homes from your agents.
Yeah, I can definitely agree there. It's a little bit more of a louder approach. Normally with a lot of ransomware, we see more quiet approaches, kind of bypassing the EDR, where they do more action on objective, more stealing data, things like that. So it kind of feels like a more smash and grab, do as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time approach.
Yeah. And obviously, right, the act of killing an EDR solution on a system means that EDR was present on the system when you showed up with your tools to kill EDR on the system. So the kind of silver lining is that you should hopefully still have that kind of initial access vector, unless they are able to get in and somehow tamper with that. But most EDRs, I think pretty much every EDR platform and system that I can think of these days is operating directly through a cloud-based application, and so that data should be making it up. So unless they can somehow interrupt the network communications before that EDR data is transmitted, you should still have that initial access vector, and that is at least better than nothing. Just kind of out of curiosity, Justin, for GRIT and the work that you guys do with data forensics, incident response, threat intelligence, how important would you say, like, when a organization gets attacked and you go in and they already have like an EDR in place and stuff, how much does that factor into the research that you guys do from there? Typically, are you guys looking for things in that EDR that you already know about, or do you tend to, like, how many new investigations that you guys go on to look into things come just because someone happened to have an EDR?
I will say a lot of the investigations where EDR is present, they usually stop the threat actor in their tracks. So it's a little bit less of an investigation because there's less data, because there's less actions by the threat actor. But more often than not, we're seeing a lot of less mature security stacks where the threat actor is kind of able to have free reign and do a little bit more damage there. In those threat instances, normally the threat actor will kind of just leave their ransom note, which makes identifying who did it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
We can go on previous and historic, like TTPs, figure out what tooling they used or things like that, kind of help inform those forensic investigations.
Awesome. Well, we have one final story that we want to highlight and cover, because we always try and find at least like one positive thing to talk about every week, amidst all the doom and gloom that can be out there, except for those beautiful shining couple weeks where we had nothing but stories about governments taking down operations around
people getting arrested and going to jail. Yes.
Yeah. That was such a glorious time. Felt like a little vacation. But this last story has been pretty much everywhere. Like this went wide over the last week. KnowBe4, very very popular and well known phishing simulation platform and tool, released a blog talking about how they had mistakenly hired a North Korean hacker. Jonathan, you did some dive into this before we started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a ton of friends that work over there, and big hats off, kudos to the team at KnowBe4 for sharing their experience and sharing their story, because this is something that we've been dealing with in the United States for a very long time. And I imagine it's also in other parts of the world where threat actors are trying to apply for developer roles within large organizations to simply target them, steal data, all kinds of different things. And it's getting more and more difficult from a remote perspective. In this particular case, there was a number of different high-tech strategies that were used involving deepfakes and AI, involving multiple different points of context to scam their way through this, stolen identities. It's just a lot of bits and pieces that it's not as simple to just raise a red flag. And for KnowBe4 to come out and share their experiences, and furthermore provide a number of really useful tips to different hiring managers, HR departments, and even people that are potentially in the position themselves that are looking for a job. Be prepared that the landscape may be changing, and you're going to have to be a little bit more granular on who you are, what you do, where you live, your references, and making sure that they're accessible and not just via email. I mean, this was a very deep ploy, and there is a lot that we have to learn from it.
Yeah, it's not going to be enough to do a video interview, because they did multiple video interviews for this particular position, and what term should we use? Your perpetrator, but the used AI platforms and software to kind of deep fake a lot of that, even using stock photo imagery and then editing that to look like themselves, to put that out. It's also not going to be enough to ask your interviewee to hold up a newspaper with today's date on it. Right? You've got to
don't do a KYC check with your driver's license.
He's holding the San Francisco Chronicle. I mean, he must. So yeah, there's some great information in KnowBe4's summary and blog about this, and calling out, hey, background checks appear to be inadequate. The names that were used weren't consistent, not properly vetting references. All of those things are called out there. Yeah.
And keep in mind, they were caught because they started loading malware on their work computer, which had EDR on it, of course, and immediately started triggering all kinds of alerts and notifications of, hey, this device, somebody's executing this stuff on here. What's going on? And then you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, right? There's things of, well, where is this laptop versus where is this individual? Where do we think it is? What's going on with it? Why are they shoving things in the USB port and clicking when they shouldn't be? And so, yeah, there's going to be tips across from a technical perspective, from an HR and hiring perspective, and also just good things to look out for. And I think some of this stuff also could apply when we're interacting with individuals online in general. I know that I have been a target of a number of scams where people have pretended or masqueraded through other compromised identities and compromised accounts. This could, I think it's just going to help everybody across the board.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely noteworthy how AI is just lowering the barrier of entry for a lot of these attacks and scams. I mean, even simple phishing emails put it through an LLM, it'll fix all this spelling mistakes and things that are just hallmark of a phishing email. So, yeah, I mean, AI was just a piece of the whole puzzle, but it definitely is powerful.
Yeah. I did see a guy breaking down phishing emails. He's like, yep, found these phishing emails. I have people send phishing emails to me all the time that they're getting. And he started doing a breakdown of, he was like, yep, this does not look like a phishing email at first, unless you're familiar with the way that AI writes. And because he started pointing out all the times that it was using those weird words that are very like 8th grader using a thesaurus for the first time.
I was going to say, I don't use very many SAT words these days.
Yeah. So really interesting. And then I just had a final question on this. Justin, do you think that this is a potential avenue that we could see for ransomware operations moving as well? Like there was just not that long ago with the adversary who gained access to was it PyPy, Jonathan?
Yep, exactly.
Yep,
same as like the XZ stuff, persistence as a mastering as an individual to figure out into an organization.
Yeah, do you think that that's going to be kind of a trend maybe that ransomware follows as well, of like just embedding an operative at a company? Or
I mean, it's not too far off from some of the casino hacks we saw last year of like just social engineering the help desk. So I mean, it's kind of along the same vein, not necessarily apples to oranges there, but I can definitely see threat actors trying to utilize this.
Awesome. All right, well, that takes us to the top of our show. Justin, thank you so much for joining us and going through the ransomware report with us. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
Make sure users know phishing training. That's one of the biggest things we see. I know that's beaten into everybody's head, but please don't click phishing links.
Yeah, on this show, we also say MFA everywhere.
Yeah, MFA everywhere. Yep. And as always, MFA all the things.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. That concludes the show. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time on a Friday, or if you're watching this on demand, for giving us whatever time you have given us here. Let us know what you thought of the stories in the comments. Any thoughts that you have. We love returning to things when people call us back to it. Thank you for your time. Until next week, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And then one more. There we go. And we will catch you all next time. MFA all the things.